Well, good morning, everybody. It is so good to be with you this morning, yet ever so nerve-wracking. So Tony applies himself to given assignments. When he works hard, and when he plays hard. Tony plays well with others, but at times becomes impatient when others don't understand the rules for games as well as he does. And my personal favorite, Tony has a lot of energy. When controlled, it's super. He sometimes forgets himself. So any guesses where those comments come from? Those were all comments on my first grade report cards. But there's more. Second grade. Tony's determination to do well can frustrate him at times. He's afraid to trust himself. Third grade, Tony's a very enthusiastic learner. He enjoys challenging himself. He needs to work on self-control during class discussions. And jumping ahead a bit to sixth grade, Tony has been quite industrious this quarter. I haven't heard much from him. He has excellent study habits, but I'd like to see him work on being patient with others that are not as fast as he, including his old teacher. So, if you want to know everything you need to know about me, it's all right there. It kind of amazes me when I go back and I read that stuff on how much it really sums up who the core of who I am is. There's just a lot in there of what I've experienced in life. So I do want to step back a little bit, though. How many of you have thought about your earliest church memory? Pretty sure most of us probably have, and most of us, it's probably a childhood memory. I know some people have come to the church later in life. And usually when I think about that, I have two stories that kind of come to mind. There's one that always comes to mind, but I've never really considered it my earliest, and I think it's probably because it's not as good a story. I remember a time when the priest was up doing something in front, and I was sitting, I think I was standing. And we usually sat, so this was a pretty large Catholic church, and we sat probably further back than where the back of this church is. And the priest was up there doing something, and here I am, I'm trying to see as this little child, and I'm standing on the pew, and I'm letting everybody know around me that I can't see, and I'm really letting them know I can't see. But without a doubt, if you ask me for my earliest church memory, I'll tell you this. Similarly, we were probably sitting about in the same area of the church, and I was sitting in the pew, and I think everybody was sitting at this time. And there I am, in my pew, I have my shirt up, and I am looking at my belly button, and I am pulling stuff out of my belly button. And I'm showing it to the people around me. I think I even probably showed it to the people behind us, too. So, sometimes in life, you look back at your childhood and you put stories together and you don't know if you're really putting them together, if they really happened together. But in my memory, that was the one time that I was ever spanked. And it was after church, and it was in the dining room of our house, and I vividly remember getting spanked, and I've always put those two stories together. They may have not been together. My parents don't remember it, so. So let me just say it again. Tony has a lot of energy. When controlled, it's super, but he sometimes forgets himself. So I am the youngest of 8 kids, just to give you a little background. And the span of kids in my family is about 18 years, so my oldest brother is just about 18 years older than I am. 6 of my siblings are 7 years older than me or more. And so there's a pretty big span. We almost had 2 families, and here's another thing, 6 of my siblings are brothers. So yeah, my sister's in the middle. She's pretty lucky, I think. She also went on to have 4 sons of her own and no daughters, so she's been entirely surrounded by boys her whole life. We each went to Catholic school for at least 6 years. I think just my oldest brother went to Catholic school for 8 years, but then St. Aloysius and Sauk just went to a sixth grade Catholic school. So taking all that in, my comments, my family background, what's it all say about me? One, I focus a lot on rules. I am a rule follower. I get frustrated when others can't see what I can. I'm often afraid to trust myself. You can imagine this one just by imagining that I'm the youngest of 8 kids. I so wanted to be the center of attention growing up. I've followed in a lot of footsteps. This is 5. So you can bet I've learned quickly, and I've managed to become extremely observant in life. And yes, number 6, I do sometimes forget myself. But I want to focus a little bit on the followed in a lot of footsteps. So my early life was consumed by watching older people, mostly brothers, doing things that I couldn't do. When they came back home, man, did I look forward to it. I just wanted to be with them. I wanted them to take notice in me. And when it didn't happen, and they went out with their friends, which is understandable, I was disappointed. But like I said, through it all, I became extremely observant. I am a people watcher. I learned what worked in life and what didn't work. So that's kind of the backdrop of my early faith formation. 1, it was the Catholic Church, so you know that there were a few milestones in it. And 2, if anyone was beyond any of those milestones, I wanted to be there too. First communion, altar boy, confirmation. We'll just leave first confession out of that. I pretty much dreaded that. I'm pretty sure I don't know anyone who didn't. Added into all that, if I saw something working for someone, I went with it. And if I saw something that didn't work for somebody, I avoided it. And all through it, I was fortunate to be exposed to a lot of people that had it working. Without a doubt, church has always been a part of my life. And in the early days especially, I kind of just assumed everybody was where I was. I couldn't see that they weren't. I couldn't imagine anyone not seeing it the way that I did. So with all that swirling around in the background, I think I hit my defining moment in 5th grade. And I can't explain why it happened. I don't, for the life of me, remember what I was thinking. All I know is that one night, after I'd already gone to bed, I came out of my room searching the house for a Bible. I don't know if it was something based on what had happened in school that day. So I ended up finding a Bible in our closet in our dining room, and I pulled it out. And some of you may have seen this Bible before, and I think it may be actually common to families in the Catholic Church, but it's got in big words on the front of it called "Reach Out." Has anyone ever seen that? I looked online last night, and I found it on Amazon, so it's still out there. So I grabbed this, and it started a routine in my life. And it's subtitled The Living New Testament, so it was only the New Testament, which I think was good for where I was at in my life. So I started a nightly routine for what would continue until I made it to the end of the Acts. Each night I would read some, and then I would pray. And because I didn't feel confident I knew how to pray, I usually felt a little, stupid with the things that I said. I started a rotation of my prayers so that I only had to come up with my own prayer every 4th night. And here's what the rotation was. I'd do my own prayer one night. I was always really focused on how I was sitting in bed, too. I wanted to make sure I did it just right. Did the Lord's Prayer the next night. And of course, when you grow up in the Catholic Church, it's called the Our Father. Did the Hail Mary the next night. And then somebody's going to have to help me pronounce this. Gloria Patri. Does anyone know that? It's kind of like a doxology. It's the glory be to the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. Yes, I still remember them. And I often remember being really relieved when it was a night that I didn't have to come up with my own prayer. But then it came to an end. I hit the end of Acts, and I don't know why I stopped, but I did. And all these years later, after I've read Revelation several times, I think it's probably a pretty good thing that I didn't start Revelation. Even if it was a kid-friendly translation, it's probably not something that in 5th or 6th grade, whatever I was, that you want to touch that. So it probably was a spirit thing. So even when that stopped, the praying continued. I mean, it would periodically where you would fall from it, but it was just always something that I would do at night. And there were probably years through high school, through college, that it slipped more often than not, and through the busyness of life once I got into adulthood. But that prayer has always been that kind of that base point for me. So when I look at how I got from there to here, I'm struck by the role that men have had in my life. I know a lot of people out there, they talk about their grandmas or their moms or stuff like that, but for me, it's always been men. And yes, I did have grandmas and moms and all that stuff that were part of the faith. I already told you I have 6 older brothers, so that's part of it. But most of them were already adults by the time I was 11, so. And though they had little impact on my faith, I can easily take pride in the life that they paved for me. I could see the places where they screwed up in life, and I could avoid that. I could see them things where they succeeded, and I wanted to be like them. So it was a perfect situation. I was incredibly blessed to encounter incredible men, even beyond that, serving as priests. That's not something you hear a lot of anymore today, but I know it's still out there. You just hear the negative. So the first one I'll bring up is Father Clare. I was pretty young when Father Clare was at St. Al's, but I very clearly remember him. And he was a very fun guy, and a lot of he just had a lot of life in him. And he took the big risk in life of one time he was up doing a homily, and he revealed to everybody that he had been wearing a toupee for all those years. And he removed it during that homily, and that was the end of it. Never showed up again. So that was just the kind of guy that he was. After he had left St. Al's, I don't know at what point it was, but at some point then he became a chaplain in the military. And I saw a couple of years ago, or maybe a year ago in the paper, that he had passed away. So he had an impact in my life some people just have that life. Then there was Father Meyer. Now, Father Meyer was somebody that would, every time that you served for a funeral, as an altar boy, he would give you $1. And so I served a lot of funerals. Not just because it was good money, but I swore at some point that I could actually officiate over the funeral because I knew them so well. Then there was Father Terry. Father Terry Connors, very Irish name. There were 2 things that I remember from him. One, by the time I was in high school, I was one of the main altar boys. I had been doing it for a while, and usually a lot of people kind of fell off over time, and by the time you're in high school, you're really one of the only ones in high school. And I think there were 3 of us. He took us to a Brewer game, and man, he smoked all day. The stuff you just don't see people doing today of smoking in a car with kids, and that's the thing that really sticks out in my head. But he was a fun guy. And then later on, when I was a senior, so the way they did things at St. Al's when you're preparing for confirmation, go through the CCD classes, and I think it was freshman, sophomore year in high school, you would actually be doing classes. Then junior year, you would have a year off of classes, and that was your service year. And so you had to do a certain number of service projects through that year. And then the senior year, I think you started with some type of a retreat, as the whole group would do a retreat. Well, I couldn't make that retreat. And so he ended up taking me one-on-one to Milwaukee, and we stopped at Holy Hill. Has anyone ever been to Holy Hill? So he introduced me to that, and then we stayed at a church in the inner city of Milwaukee for that night. And he took me to a seminary there, and we toured the seminary. Just a great day. I was worried going into that he was going to smoke all day again, but I think between that first time and then, he had quit smoking, so it was great. Then there was Father Sipe, so I said that after our service year, we came back and we had the retreat year, and then you would meet in a family's home for that last year of preparing for confirmation. It was always a couple that would present each week's topic. And the couple that had done for the first semester, they couldn't do it for the second semester of that year, and so Father Sipe ended up taking us into his house, and he spent that last semester with us preparing for confirmation. And just a great guy. I mean, it was great to gather in his house and just listen to his take on life and the faith. So, and then Father Gary. Father Gary came through. This was after I had gone away to college, but I would come back to go to church, and he was one of those guys that you would just observe him and say, "I want what he's having." I think years later, if you talk to any of the women that were around when he was around, they called him Father What a Waste. But he was a great guy, and there were times when I would just go to his place and we would just spend time together, and he made the time for me, even all those years later. And he ended up marrying Renee and I too, so that was a great experience. So the string of male influences in my life has continued even after Renee and I were married. In January of 1997, I can't believe that that's that long ago now, Renee and I had been married for a little more than a year. We had slowly become more involved at St. Martin's and Cross Plains. And there was a day when I received a simple verbal invitation from the pastor. A group of couples were getting together at one of the couples' houses on a Friday or Saturday night, I'm not sure which it was. And Renee and I were usually agreeable to pretty much anything. We would go, and so we went. So it turned out that this was all part of a relatively newly formed men's group getting together, and the idea was the men would prepare food for the wives that night. And you guys know what men do when we prepare food, right? There's usually fire involved, so we cooked with fire. We did a few later, too, and when guys plan food, it's interesting. So we'll just say one time we made all man food stuff and pretty interesting foods. But through that, I met a group of men that pretty much changed my life. I know I had been in the faith all that time, but they really did change my life. I learned that their weekly meetings were really early in the morning, and I was relatively recent out of college, and that early mornings don't go very well, but I went. So I also vividly remember this. So it's January. January in Wisconsin at about 6 or 6:30 is very dark, very cold, and to get out of bed and go out into the cold and do that, and I walked through the basement door of the church, and what did I find when I walked through the door? I found a group of men standing around a boombox with paper in their hands, singing to a song that was on a tape. Not something you see very often. So that kind of set me up for, this is a different group. This is something that can do something for me. So in that group, I was a newlywed. There were a few late in life newlyweds in the group, one that had never been married before, some that were married for the second and even third time. Some were due to the loss of a spouse, some were due to divorce, and some both. Actually, one person that had both had lost through divorce and a loss of a spouse. Most of them had children, so I was the oddball in the group. Some had grown children. There was even one father-son duo in the group. So there was a lot of experience to learn from there. Every week we shared highs and lows. We read books. We shared frustrations. We encouraged each other. It took all I had been accumulating in life, and it brought it together. It was very good. I couldn't imagine it not lasting forever. So it came as a bit of a surprise to me when that all began unraveling. Over time, some just disappeared with busy lives, some were replaced by others. But really, over time, more left than came. At one point, I was even shaken to my core when the pastor decided to leave altogether. A close friend, really close friend, and I never imagined that I would never really see him again. Through it all, I observed shortcomings in myself. I observed shortcomings in everybody else around me. But I remained close to those men that were still there. I stayed involved in the church, became part of the pastoral call team, became part of the church council. And before I knew it, a couple years had passed, and I found myself smack dab in the middle of a church that was falling apart. Not to mention, I found myself as the president of what I would really, at that point, consider that a dying congregation at that point in time. I met with concerned people, tried to listen, and I wrestled with what to do and how to handle it. I was really at a bottom that kind of stretched on for a few years, just trying to figure out how do I sort through all of this. By then, one by one, the men's group had dwindled down to 2 or 3 of us, depending on the time of the year. And through that whole process, there's probably a few things that when I think about became clear to me about life, about myself. And one of them is that I am afraid of one-on-one situations. So if you ever observe me and you watch me, I avoid those one-on-one situations like the plague oftentimes. You know, I watched 3 friends die through that time, and I never visited them as much as I should have. One of them, I visited him the last time 6 months before he died. The next time I got it a little better, I visited him a couple weeks before he died. And then the last one, a little better. So I do get better with it over time. But I'm awkward. I always have that sense that I'm awkward, and I'm afraid of being awkward. And back to those report card comments, I don't trust myself. And I never trust myself with my ability to converse with people. I've become hesitant to get close with anybody. It's more of a labored thing than it used to be. And there's always a force, and I didn't expect this coming into life. There's always a force that is tearing people apart, and we have to be constantly vigilant to it. The final death came just a couple years ago. The old group had literally and figuratively died, and I miss them so much. To be brief, I know this is going on longer, I'll just say that the Spirit led me here to New Heights. Even before that group had fully disbanded. And there's a lot of story behind that, but I won't go into that today. So for several years, Renee and I were part of 2 church families. Neither one of us was willing to make the call and leave St. Martin's. We're not a very decisive couple. So we split our time between there and here. I worked hard to build new worship opportunities over there, but my connection with many had faded by that point. I no longer had a support group, and I lacked connections. And by that time, the only remaining members of the men's group were no longer members of that congregation. And because I was still around, I had the key to the building, so we could continue meeting there. I was already connecting to men here at New Heights at that point. One day, we just finally reached the tipping point where it only made sense to make the leap. It was a great leap to make, and I've learned so much since we've been here at New Heights. It's been amazing. The healing continues, but the scars really do remain. Since the Spirit had seemingly moved so freely through St. Martin's at one point, and then it just seemed to go away, I'm constantly on guard for that, expecting it to happen here too. I'm extremely gun-shy about so many things. I long for the days when I could truly forget myself. Don't get me wrong, though, I'm extremely happy with my life, and my faith is stronger than ever. I watch with amazement as my story continues to be made, but I watch with even bigger amazement as my kids' stories are made. Never, through any of it, did I doubt that God was present. Mainly, I found myself frustrated when people didn't get it. I have no doubt that my walk with Christ goes back as far as I can remember. Is it a stretch to find Jesus in belly buttons? Maybe. But I know he's been with me every step of the way. He was there when I said my first sincere words to him. He was there when I had to write an apology note to the principal after misbehaving in church. He was there when I graduated from high school, from college. He was at my wedding. He was there when I was unemployed and we were on our last few dollars. He was there as I cried with joy over the birth of my son, my daughter. He was there. When I cheered both of them up, jeez. My voice gets higher. He was there when I cheered for them for their first steps. Most importantly, he was there even through all of the struggles. No matter what, believing has always been easy for me. It just makes sense. You see, I said I have no idea why I sought that Bible out in the 5th grade, but if I think about it, it's really pretty clear. It really wasn't me, but it was the Spirit in me. And thanks be to God for that. So I'll leave you once again repeating the words of my 1st grade teacher, Sister Joyce. Tony has a lot of energy. When controlled, it's super. He sometimes forgets himself. Tony plays well with others, but at times becomes impatient when others don't understand the rules for the games as well as he does. And I hope I can one day live up to my former self with this one. Tony applies himself to given assignments. When he works hard. I still do that. And when he plays hard. I want to do that again someday. Amen.